Not every sound that fills your headphones is neutral. It isn't as harmless as it feels. Some rhythms do more than entertain you, they train you. And every day, believers who love God with their whole heart press play without ever pausing to ask what they are actually welcoming into their spirit through their earbuds. Today, I want to bring you a subject most pastors avoid from the pulpit. We are walking through 6 categories of music that should never be given a place in your home, your mind, or your walk with God, and why what feeds your spirit shapes you far more deeply than most people have ever considered. 1 Samuel 16:23 tells us that when a tormenting spirit troubled King Saul, David would pick up his harp, and the scripture says the spirit would leave him. That single verse tells us something we tend to forget. Sound is not spiritually empty. It carries weight. It can calm a troubled soul, and it can also stir up something that should never have been stirred. So let us walk through these 6, one at a time, and see which doors they quietly open. 1. Music that dresses up evil and calls it art. It has nothing to do with genre or tempo. It has everything to do with lyrics that praise darkness on purpose, turning rebellion against God into something worth admiring. I once counseled a young father in our church, gifted with his hands, devoted to his kids, who had drifted into a corner of music, built entirely around mocking the cross and glamorizing death. He shrugged it off every time. He told me it was just theater, that none of it meant anything to him personally. But something in my spirit tightened every time that music played near him. Because Scripture never asks whether you personally believe what you are singing. It only asks what you are declaring with your mouth. 1 Corinthians 10:20-21 warns that what pagans offer in sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God, and that we cannot share the table of the Lord and the table of demons at the same time. There is a striking parallel in the story of Saul, desperate and afraid, seeking out a medium at Endor instead of seeking the Lord he had already abandoned. He did not think he was inviting darkness in. He thought he was simply looking for answers. But the door he opened cost him everything. Rehearse something with your lips long enough, and you will eventually build it a home in your heart. 2. Lyrics that flatten a person down to a body. Believers will defend this one harder than any other, because a good beat makes it easy to excuse. I remember a young woman in our congregation, faithful, kind, quick to serve anyone in need, whose entire morning playlist stripped romance down to conquest and stripped people down to bodies. She insisted plainly that the words never actually registered with her. But your spirit absorbs far more than your conscious mind admits, whether you notice it or not. Matthew 5:28 tells us that whoever looks at another person with lust has already sinned in his heart. If a single glance can defile the heart that deeply, what does an hour of repeated lyrics do to it every single day? In the book of Job, we read of a man who made a covenant with his own eyes, refusing to look with desire at what was not his. He guarded the gate before the gate was ever tested. Philippians 4:8 calls us toward whatever is honorable, whatever is pleasing, whatever is worthy of praise, and instructs us to dwell on these things, not merely steer clear of the rest. Pour something into your ears long enough, and it becomes what fills your imagination. And your imagination, given time, becomes the shape of your life. 3. Tracks that make cruelty something to laugh at. Culture gives this one cover by calling it edgy, instead of naming it what it is. I remember riding with an old friend years ago, while lyrics casually celebrated violence, not as a warning and not as a lament, but as something worth cheering for. What unsettled me was not the song itself. It was that nobody else in the car even reacted. Nobody flinched. That is how this danger works. It rarely strikes the first time you hear it. It doesn't work that fast. It strikes the 100th time, when your heart has stopped noticing at all. God does not merely dislike cruelty. He hates the love of it. Proverbs 4:23 tells us to guard our hearts above everything else, because everything we do flows out from there. In the Gospels, a young girl's dance at a birthday feast becomes entertainment that ends in the execution of John the Baptist. A chilling picture of how quickly a celebration can become the stage for bloodshed when no one in the room is willing to object. Training yourself to laugh at cruelty never stays background noise for long. It quietly redraws the line of what your conscience will tolerate. If this message is already making you think twice about your own playlist, brother, sister, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and drop this line below. God, keep watch over what I allow into my spirit. Now stay with me. because the next three are the ones that catch most believers completely off guard. 4. Anthems that make rebellion feel like a personality. A moody lyric here and there isn't the issue. The issue is music that teaches you to wear disobedience like a crown. I remember a teenager from a family close to ours, raised in the church, who slowly gravitated toward artists whose entire persona was built on defying every authority in his life, his parents, his government, even God himself, and making that defiance sound courageous. Before long, he was repeating the same lines from his headphones in ordinary conversation, insisting that no one had the right to tell him anything. His mother assumed it was simply a season, that it wasn't anything deeper. But she began to notice those lyrics were not just playing in his ears anymore. They were shaping how he actually lived. Romans 13, 1-2 tells us plainly that every person is to submit to governing authorities because there is no authority except what God has appointed. And whoever resists that authority is resisting what God himself has put in place. Absalom, David's own son, spent years cultivating an image of charm and independence at the city gate, positioning himself as the answer to every complaint against his father's rule. His rebellion did not begin with a sword. It began with a carefully built identity. Crown something as brave through your headphones long enough, and you will eventually defend it with your life. 5. Sound built on purpose for ritual, chant, or trance. It works differently than lyrics that mock or glorify darkness outright. This is sound deliberately built through repetition and rhythm to alter the state of your spirit and open a door beyond ordinary listening. A friend once invited me to an event she described as a sound bath, where wordless tones and chants in a tongue she could not translate, all layered underneath whispered instructions to release your energy and welcome in whatever wanted to come through. She told me afterward that she felt lighter and strangely at peace. But peace by itself isn't proof that God was in the room. 2 Corinthians 11:14 warns us plainly that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. God's people were already warned long ago against divination and consulting spirits. Centuries before modern wellness culture repackaged the same practices with softer language. At Mount Carmel, the prophets of Baal shouted, danced, and cut themselves for hours, working themselves into a frenzy to summon a God who never answered. Their ritual produced intensity, but it produced no true presence. A calm feeling by itself proves nothing about its source. Examine the spirit driving the sound, not only how the sound makes you feel. 6. The music that slowly takes God's seat as your comfort. Nobody flags this one, because on the surface it never looks sinful. It presents itself as ordinary self-care. There was a widow in our church who walked through a season of grief so heavy she could barely function. And in that season, one singer's voice became the soundtrack she leaned on constantly. The very first thing her hand reached for each morning, and the very last thing echoing in her ears each night. Over time, I noticed she reached for her earbuds long before she ever reached for a prayer. Her comfort had quietly changed addresses. I want to be clear that music itself is not the enemy here. Even a genuinely godly song can be twisted into this role. It is never really about the music. It is about whatever that music has quietly taken the place of. At the foot of Mount Sinai, while Moses delayed on the mountain, the people gathered around a golden calf, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to sing and dance, turning to a manufactured comfort instead of waiting on the God who had already rescued them. Psalm 42:11 puts words to the question a grieving soul has to answer honestly sooner or later. Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God. When any song, even a beautiful one, becomes the very first place your soul runs for comfort or identity or escape, it has slipped into a throne that was reserved for God alone. Before we finish, there is something you need to hear clearly. None of this is meant as an assault on music as a gift. God created sound and rhythm and melody. He instructed his people to lift their voices, take up instruments, and pour out melody before him with everything in them. Music remains one of the most stunning gifts he ever gave humanity, capable of carrying his glory the way almost nothing else on this earth can. None of what we covered today is meant to make you ashamed of every song you have ever loved. God knows that most of us never stopped to question what certain lyrics or certain habits were quietly building inside of us. But now that you know better, you have the chance to choose better. Ephesians 5:19 hands us the better path, calling believers to address one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart before the Lord. Pursue sound that builds life instead of eroding it. Choose lyrics that strengthen your spirit instead of hollowing it out. Choose music that leads you back toward God instead of quietly becoming a substitute for Him. 1 Samuel 16:23 still stands. What you let into your spirit through sound will either calm the storm inside you or feed it. Choose songs that carry truth, not just a good hook. Choose an atmosphere that welcomes His presence, not one that merely entertains you into forgetting Him. If this message spoke to you today, do something small but real right now. God, watch over everything I allow into my soul. It is a short declaration, but it carries real weight. And if there is someone in your life whose playlist needs to hear this too, send it to them today. It could be the message that changes what they let shape their spirit for years to come. Do not forget to hit subscribe so this community keeps growing in the wisdom of the Word, week after week. Grace and peace to you, my brother, my sister. See you in the next one.